It's Wednesday, May 9th. I'm Scott,
I'm Rim.
and this is Geeknights. Tonight, Watchmen. Let's do this.
Well, over the weekend, thanks to Emily getting tickets for me, I got to go see Brave Story in the theater.
But we already saw it in the house.
Yeah, and you know what? The movie's pretty enough to where it was really worth seeing it again just to see it in the theater. That is a really beautiful movie.
It was alright.
Yeah, well, you're about just about everything, so I don't really consider your opinion.
It says the person who hates 99% of everything there is.
Yeah, particularly comic books,
I think
but
the
I digress.
difference the difference is that you either hate something or you like it. And
I have
mostly meh.
I have a very wide range of feelings on many things.
I don't know. You seem to either be like, that sucks or that's awesome, and I seem to be meh on almost everything.
No, not really.
Not
at all.
What are you meh about?
Most things,
Uh-huh.
really.
Maybe you
Most
just don't-
anime that comes, I just don't like it.
You don't seem to always say meh.
What do you mean? Meh isn't something you have to say. Meh is the default opinion.
Yeah, I think that's what it is that you sort of only express the,
I don't express a non-opinion. If I watch a show that's kind of boring like Skullman, I say, huh, and I just don't react to it because I have nothing to say.
I think a middling opinion is an opinion.
But it is an opinion, but I don't express it because there's no reason to.
Eh?
Besides, the point is, I think Brave Story is a great movie, and I highly recommend that anyone out there who likes anime see it. Also, I will note that while the movie and the dub was pretty piss poor, I gotta say.
Really?
The
It
thing
didn't
is,
seem like a movie that was hard to dub either.
no, I expected it to be a pretty and it seemed okay at first until I started
The
hearing
frog
more
character?
than pretty much from him on. Every single character's voice actor sounded like they were yelling all the time, regardless of whether or not the person on screen was yelling. Everyone's voice was either gravelly, rah, 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 or mealy, me, 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 me. So the dub basically sounds like, rah, 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 me, me, da, 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 me, 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 da.
Well, it was that kind of movie.
No, it was so cheesy in the dub. And the dialogue itself isn't that cheesy. It's just the way it was dubbed and the way they decided to do it was really bad.
Yeah, I could definitely see how that could be.
However, especially with that circus scene, even if you end up seeing the dub, if you can catch this movie in a theater as opposed to just on the BitTorrents, I'd recommend it.
Yeah. It's definitely worth watching this movie once if you can. But, it's not the best thing ever.
Of course, more importantly, while we were in the city, there is a dish, a culinary sensation, a thing that I've never actually had before, but I knew of the existence by name only, and I knew it was Canadian, and particularly Quebecois. And finally, also, Emily decided to buy some for me. I had poutine.
All right.
It's basically a cup filled with super fat French fries, gravy, chicken in bits, cheese, curds, and pretty much awesome wonderfulness.
So it's just a heart attack in a cup.
Yeah, it had to be at least 800 calories.
All right.
It was so awesome. I think I have a new favorite food.
I think I'll just stay away from that for the sake of my arteries.
It was almost as good as a White Castle.
Disgusting.
See, I don't know what your problem is with White Castle. Those are quality little burgers for what you pay. In fact, if you take into account the price versus the unit quality, it's probably the best deal on food in the world.
It's pretty bad. If I was a starving person in Africa, maybe I'd eat a White Castle, but other than that, no.
Dude, when I was growing up in Sterling Heights, White Castle and Taco Bell were banned from Sterling Heights due to various...
With good reason.
And also, White Castles were hard to find up there. We ended up fairly often in high school getting a big group of people together, cramming into a car, and driving a half hour just to get to the one White Castle we could find.
That was smart.
And buying sacks of 100.
You couldn't have possibly spent that money and time in any better way.
What money? Gas cost practically nothing back then, and the burgers cost less.
Yeah, but imagine if you added up all of them together.
You know what?
You could have gotten one video game, which is better than all the White Castles in the world.
No, because those White Castle trips, while not quite a Harold and Kumar level, were generally minor defining moments in my childhood. Kids in some places go down to the levee, but the levee was dry. Well, we drove out to White Castle.
We just went to the diner where we had decent food.
Oh, we went to the diner,
and you
too.
could buy onion rings by the foot.
See, we went to the Coney Island diners, where I could get an entire meal for $1.99.
We went to the real diner where you would get a stack of pancakes for $6.
Real diner, what?
Yeah, real diners
Nah.
with real food that is good and edible and
Dude, compared to some places in Michigan in the Midwest, or pretty much anywhere on the Jersey Shore, or pretty much anywhere in New Jersey, you don't have any diners in Connecticut.
there's diners in Connecticut, a lot of them. What do you know? How many diners in Connecticut have you eaten in?
2.
Which ones?
I don't even know, but I stopped at 2 different diners. Remember all those times I ended up stopping at your house on the way home from a con or something? Way back when I lived out here alone. Every time I left your house, I'd always stop at some diner along the way to eat.
Oh, the diners that are on the way to here from my parents' house are not the best ones in Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
The good ones, there's a good one in Westport, and there's a good one in Fairfield, and...
See, when I'm in Jersey, I don't need to ask that question. I just go to any diner.
Well, New Jersey does have better diners than Connecticut, but regardless, Connecticut has better diners than Michigan.
I'm just, hey. Michigan has really good Greek food, surprisingly. There's a lot of Greeks in Michigan. Well, in southeast Michigan.
Yeah, but they're not diner Greek. They're, shawarma falafel places.
No, they're all diner Greek.
Uh-huh.
There's very little shawarma falafel out there.
Besides, the best diners, while they may offer great Greek food, usually have to offer non-Greek food as well.
Yeah, sadly, most diners I go to now don't have great Greek food. And they just kind of have mad diner food.
You got to go to diners like the Athena something or the Zeus something Olympus diner.
What's the one we go to in Wildwood?
The Star Diner.
Yeah, but that one's a pretty good diner.
It's a good diner, yeah. The
Anyway.
best diner I've ever eaten at is the TikTok Diner in Jersey.
Anyway, in the news, it's really not much of a news, and I had something else, but I just found this kind of funny when Scott clicked on it while we were sitting in the living room. There's a poll on the Anime News Network, and the poll is, do you read Protoculture?
Protoculture Addicts.
Ah.
Protoculture Addicts is a magazine. It is the oldest...
Wait, a magazine?
Yeah, it's
what kind of thing is that?
It's sort of like this paper that they stick together and write shit on. It's
Oh,
like someone prints out a web page and they try to sell it to you.
Oh, I've seen those. They cost a lot of money. The pages are all glossy. They're more ads than content. Yeah, those things.
Yeah, those things. So, Protoculture Addicts is the oldest anime magazine in the United States. And surprisingly enough, there have been a lot of anime magazines in the United States in English.
Yeah, a lot of them were pretty bad.
Well, some of them were good, some of them were bad. Some of them were manga. They were like manga anthologies, and some of them were just actual magazines about anime with anime news and ads and stuff like that. And some of them have failed, and some of them are still around in various forms and whatever. Protoculture Addicts is the oldest one. It's still around, and I think in 2005 they teamed up with the Anime News Network in a bid to stay alive, and they are still alive.
Well, for now, because this poll pretty much went exactly the way I expected. You see, Scott clicked on the poll because we saw the poll, and we both don't really read magazines anymore at all.
Maybe if I'm in a dentist's office and I forgot my DS.
Yep.
And I'm in the waiting room.
So never, because you always have your DS.
Exactly.
Maybe if the battery went down.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
If the dentist made me wait all day.
But, I mean, the last magazines I bought or subscribed to were Dragon Magazine, which I realized after 6 years of subscribing that it was useless.
Yep.
One day I was like, why do I subscribe to this? I only kind of read through it briefly, and then I stick it in the pile.
Yep.
And it's a lot of money. And I'll talk about New Type in a minute. But so Scott clicks on the poll, and there's a million possible answers.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be yes, no. But no, there were like 20 different answers to choose from.
So Scott's sitting there going, huh.
I was just looking for the answer that I knew was the one I wanted.
Now, meanwhile, because I guess I have the rim eye when it comes to Rim and Scott opinions.
Well, I was reading from top to bottom.
Yeah, I just zeroed in on the option that pretty much says exactly how I was sure Scott would feel. Quote, I don't read any anime print magazines, nor do I intend to.
That is the correct answer to the question, do you read Protoculture Addicts?
Well, that answer is definitely winning the poll. And I point out that while it is winning, number 3 is, what is Protoculture Addicts?
If they want me to read their anime magazine, they're going to have to...
go on.
They're going to have to find some way to basically make it illegal to put anime news on the internet for free.
See, in general, I think that most magazines... Now, there are exceptions. I'm not going to go into... I mean, there are magazines that do serve useful purposes. Yeah. There are also things like journals and such. But when it comes to things like anime or video games or anything like that, I really think that this thing called the internet has obviated the need for this entire market, and I can't believe it still exists. Who gets their opinions on video games from a video game magazine?
Someone who doesn't know how to read Penny Arcade, Kotaku, or Joystick.
I mean, if anything, at best case, unless they employ nothing but actual psychics, which, if they did, I would probably subscribe.
Yep.
But, there's no way they could beat the internet to any news because they have to print, meaning there's a point well before you get the magazine whereupon they had to say, all right, this is as up to date as this issue is going to be because now we are going to kill a bunch of trees, put a bunch of ink on it, put it in plastic, and make a bunch of people drive around the country and putting them in people's mailboxes.
Yep. Now, even if a magazine does have a couple advantages, number one, they can get information because they're, real media, as opposed to underground internet media. They can go and get exclusives from the source that they won't tell to a blog. So, for example, Nintendo Power, they know things that no Nintendo blog knows about, and they can put those things in their magazine. So if you want to find out first, you have to subscribe to the magazine. The problem is, as soon as that magazine comes out, someone types in what the hell it says, and I find out 5 minutes later.
Yep.
Not a big deal.
Plus, I mean, a lot of people say, oh yeah, blogs aren't real journalism, but you can't really deny them outright because as time goes along, that sort of media is becoming more and more legitimate, and legitimate people out there are starting to pay attention to them and give their press releases to blogs.
Yep, despite the fact that any video game blog, the average video game blog I'd say is 50% complete bullshit rumor mongering and 50% just video game stuff. Despite that fact, which I can't deny, by reading video game blogs and pretty much nothing else about video games, I get more information about video games than I ever got subscribing to GamePro. And I know when all the games are coming out. I know which games are good. I know which games are bad. I know all about Xbox games, even though I don't have one and don't care. And I know that all sorts of stuff is going on. And it works, regardless of the crappiness of the quality in general.
Yeah, I mean, I used to subscribe to PC Gamer, and back then there really wasn't an internet like there is today, so I needed something like that to find out about PC games.
And you got the demo CDs because you couldn't download giant demos like that.
Which were basically free games because by the time I got done playing the demos...
You didn't want to play the game anymore.
No, because either the game was dumb or it was awesome, but oh look, the next set of demos came out. I mean, I played that One Must Fall 2097 demo for like...
Oh, I played that so much, you have no idea.
By the time I finished playing the demo... I don't think you could actually purchase One Must Fall anymore.
I think that was well, you can get it for free now, but...
Well, now you can,
yes.
And we should talk about that someday, because that's one of my favorite fighting games ever.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the best fighting
pretty
games.
much that and Bushido Blade 2.
I don't like Bushido Blade.
You suck.
I like the idea of Bushido Blade.
Now, I've never actually read Protoculture Addicts, so if anyone could think of any reason why I should, I'll hear you out. But I would like to mention New Type magazine, which... I can't speak as to how cool or interesting Protoculture might be, but the story of New Type magazine, because remember, it used to
at least our interaction with New Type magazine.
It used to not be in English, but all the cool kids had the Japanese New Types. You'd buy them at cons, you'd see them around, people would carry them to the anime club.
People at the anime club would subscribe to the Japanese New Type.
Yeah, in fact, at the RIT Anime Club, we had the library, we could check out anime and manga and all sorts of things. We had, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of tapes. Tapes.
Hundreds of tapes, not thousands.
Well, we broke 1,000 during our tenure.
Not thousands. That would be at least 2,000.
Yeah. Well, thousands of tapes because we also had the tape.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I guess if you count every centimeter of duct tape as one tape.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
we had a lot of tapes, a lot of all that stuff. And not only could you check out New Type magazine, but a lot of people did. And it was in Japanese. And when I first opened a New Type, it's gigantic and beautiful.
It's like in Japanese, New Type is the greatest magazine ever to an English-speaking person because it has these amazing pictures of all these anime you can kind of figure out like when they're coming out or if they're good or not and what they're about.
And they'll have character profiles and all these shots and pictures and beautiful fold-outs and
all
fun
sorts of
things.
extras like showing you the characters from every angle and every character in the whole show, even the minor characters and all the robots and all the weapons and... It's pretty freaking cool to be able to, because usually you watch an anime, everything's moving, stuff doesn't stay on the screen very long at the angle. So in New Type, you can look at the characters that, and really look at them for a long time and inspect them, and it was pretty cool.
I read, quotes in the air, read New Type every month for like 5 months when it was in Japanese, and I can't read Japanese at all.
Me also.
And all I could think was that, goddamn, if this was in English, it would be the best thing ever, because I was entertained enough by the pictures, but I saw all this Japanese words, and I knew that those words were telling me interesting things.
So then what was it? Otakon.
Was it our first or second Otakon? I don't remember.
I'm gonna look it up. Hold on.
It was years ago. It was back when I was poor, because I couldn't afford to subscribe to New Type. And in fact, I ended up subscribing anyway, and then I got a bunch of issues, and then they stopped sending them to me when I didn't pay.
Yeah, so this must have been Otakon 2002. They handed out in the dealer's room, because ADV does the New Type USA. They handed out free issues of New Type USA number 0, which had Razafon on the cover.
Now, much like when Sailor Moon finally sees behind Tuxedo Mask's mask and find out that he's actually that guy I like, or that guy I don't like, or whatever, New Type's mask fell off, as I could now read all those previously mythical words. And now, to not go into much more detail, because I want to get done with the news, it was drivel. It was absolute drivel. There was no reason to ever look into a New Type again. Those words were meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, when New Type USA came out, I got a few of the issues. Dude, you buy them, or did I buy them?
I just said how I got them. I didn't pay for them, and eventually they stopped sending them to me.
Oh, right. You sent in a subscription card. They sent you a few issues, but you never paid the $75.
Yeah, the $75.
A year, right. So, at those first early New Type USAs, I read them, but I didn't read the words. I read them the same way I read the Japanese one. I looked at the pictures, and then I put it away.
Yeah.
Rim was in the magazine once, though.
I was, in fact. Myself and Scott Johnson were in New Type. We were featured in this page thing about pretty much the legendary... Scott Johnson was actually called the legendary anime club master, or something to that effect. I forget. I've got the issue laying around.
Yep.
In fact, I should scan it in and post a picture of it because my ego's so big. And the awesome thing was that it mentioned Scott Johnson a few times, but all the pictures were of me.
There's only one picture.
No, there were 2.
Was there?
There were at least 2.
I don't remember.
Because I had 2 different angles, and both of them, clearly, I'm the one speaking and I'm the one centered. But Scott got the legendary title, so I couldn't really...
Yeah, your name isn't even in it, I don't think.
I don't remember.
Anyway.
Yeah, though we talked to the guy afterward, he's like, shit, yeah, I didn't really put all the effort I should have into that article.
It's a tiny article that no one read, so who cares?
Well, no one reads anything in New Type because it's garbage.
Yep. All the magazines are garbage.
Well,
period.
particularly New Type because I've actually read it. And the words, there was so little substance. It was like I knew less about the anime than when I started.
I remember I also bought a couple issues of like Anime Insider, which is like the Wizard anime magazine, and that was... I dare say it was worse than Wizard Magazine, which is one of the worst magazines ever.
Hey, remember Scry?
Oh, God, I had a few of those.
So did I.
Mostly for the list of magic cards.
Yep, so I could find out how much my Mox Emerald was worth.
All right, so here's an anime news. I'm going to be quick with this. You know Satoshi Kon, our living anime god.
Yes.
Creator of all the awesome anime that if you haven't seen, stop listening to this podcast because they're better than this podcast.
Yeah, I got it. Perfect Blue is fantastic. Millennium Actress is really, really good. Tokyo Godfathers, Paranoia Agents.
Yeah, that's all he made. Okay.
Paprika.
Yep, that's going to be out real soon. He did some interview in Portuguese. I don't know if he was speaking Portuguese, but he must have had a translator.
Oh, he's fluent in Portuguese.
Is he really?
I have no idea.
Me either, but he did an interview. The interview was in Portuguese, and then it was translated from Portuguese to English. You can read this interview with Satoshi Kon, and if you thought he was a genius based upon his artistic works, you will think he is a double genius based upon his interview.
Yeah. I mean, the point I would make is that when it comes to things that are awesome and the people that make them, sometimes something is awesome despite the person who made it. And sometimes something is awesome because of the person who made it.
Let's see.
Star Wars, case of the former.
Harlan Ellison, case of the former.
Yes. Everything Satoshi Kon did?
The latter.
I mean, there's a lot of complexity to the things he's made. And you get the impression that that was all intentional entirely. Like, he puts a lot of thought into the works he does.
Kazuo Koike. The former or the latter?
No one will ever know. Now, also, I would like to do a geek back.
No.
Because we haven't done geek backs in a while. But
We did a whole episode of one.
Yeah, but I mean, that wasn't really a geek back. That was more of a episode on the future of Geeknights that we foiled with the question someone asked. It wasn't like a geek bag stuck into a show.
All right.
And partly because we've been asking a lot of people to send us a lot of feedback, and a lot of you have. The people coming out of the woodwork and actually talking to us, you're all awesome because you have already moved beyond consumer and become interactor. You're one step away from producer.
Yep, we've talked about this before in that for any given work of art or media or whatever, 90% of the people just observe or consume that work. 10% of people interact with that work.
That's 100%.
And whatever, you get the idea. And then 1% of people, actually produce works.
Yes.
So most people listening to this podcast, about 90% of you, all you do is listen to this podcast. You don't do anything else involving this podcast. You don't post in the forum. You don't email us. You don't voicemail us. You don't make your own podcast. You don't do anything.
Now, I understand that some of you probably do something out there and we're not talking to you. I mean, if you're crazily active on like the Comic Geek Speak forums or something, we don't expect you to also be crazily active with us.
Yeah. But some people out there, you're just listening to Geeknights, not doing anything else. And you know what I say to you? You're in the 90%. Is that cool? No, it's not so cool. You want to move into the 10%. Then you'll be in the 90th percentile. Better than most people as opposed to just being most people.
Plus, I will point out that if you like Geeknights, which you must because you're listening, I'll point
Unless
out...
it's your first time. What's up?
Yeah, and you might hate it, which is fine. But if you go to our forums, pretty much everyone in there thinks along the same lines you do. And I really think that our forums are some of the better forums on the internet. And I'm not kidding about that.
Well, if you want to be cool and like Rim and Scott, you should.
Wait a minute. We're using peer pressure in order to tell people to resist the bandwagon.
Yes.
We're trying to get you off of one bandwagon onto another bandwagon.
But we're not lying to you. We're actually trying to help you out and move you to the superior bandwagon.
So anyway.
Of not being the sheep, but being the sheepdog.
Ah, sheepdog. Because the next step up is the shepherd, which is really hard to be.
Except we're the shepherds.
Well, I guess the step up from that is the pirate in the post-apocalyptic Fist of the North Star world who kills the shepherd, then kills the sheep.
That's also me.
Anyway, so a while ago, we did an episode on the worst podcast ever, and we called out a bunch of podcasts, and some of
you're still doing the geek bag.
Yeah, and some of those podcasts responded to us, and not too long ago, one of the hosts of Anime World Order had a crazy hissy fit about something Scott said, and that was hilarious. And I realized something, and this feedback is going to really put it into relief for you. I'll read the feedback first, and I'll tell you what I learned from it. This is from One Sin. I first heard about Geeknights from Anime World Order during a con report, I think. Then, after the whole Clarissa Tatera thing, I began to consider giving Geeknights a shot. I finally subscribed after listening to the worst podcast episode. I found out about it from some Anime Pulse fans who were indignant and whatnot over how badly their precious show got owned. I figure anyone decent enough to see through that show was worth listening to. Now, the moral of this story is that the more anyone out there puts the hate on us, the more listeners we get. Because this isn't the first time I've gotten a feedback like this. I've gotten at least, I'm not going to exaggerate here, 1, 2. I've gotten 6 or 7 emails or feedbacks that basically said, yeah, I found your show because someone said you sucked.
So, if anyone out there still believes that there's a such thing as bad publicity, you're wrong.
Yes.
This is why, part of the reason why, we are one of the few it seems like a lot of podcasts are just afraid to be critical, especially of other podcasts. This is why we fear nothing and will say whatever the hell we want. Because number one, we'll be known as the podcast that says whatever the hell we want, which makes, I think, makes us a better podcast.
I think so.
And 2, we'll occasionally get bad publicity, which is good.
Yes. So, One Sin, thanks for joining the forums. It's good to have you here. Things of the day. I'm going to be real quick here. There's a video of a little turtle and a cat. And the turtle, like a little machine, just won't leave that cat alone. It's like an attack turtle, and it's hilarious.
I'm not a big fan of animals, but I kind of like that turtle.
I really like turtles, for one. I think they're cute.
I like the way its arms and legs move because they're kind of like backwards C's, and they kind of...
And that's not just a normal turtle. That is a turtle on a mission.
Scott, why do you care about that turtle? It's not you.
Anyway.
So, for all you people out there who are
Especially you, Scottbot.
who are not too up on the superhero fan culture that is around the world of nerddom, I guess. If you ever wondered the kind of crazy collections that crazy nerds have, take a look at this. This is a guy who likes Doctor Strange. Now, I like Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is cool. This guy really likes Doctor Strange. He likes Doctor Strange so much, he owns pretty much, it has to be, every piece of Doctor Strange merchandise ever.
Wow.
So, here you go. Every piece of Doctor Strange merchandise ever, and a whole bunch of original Doctor Strange art, and a Doctor Strange costume, and a whole lot of Doctor Strange shit. Pretty much, if you're looking for anything Doctor Strange, it'll be in one of these pictures, so you'll know what to look for.
Right. So, Anime World Order, when they talk about an important show or a big show, and it's one of those things that they really care about, they always seem to get nervous, like, I hope I don't fuck this up. I hope I do this show justice.
And they prepare well in advance, and they have a whole bunch of stuff written down, I assume.
Well, that is very much how I feel about what we're about to talk about, but I have not done any more preparation than I normally do.
No, I didn't prepare at all, but that is correct. This is a show that is not to be fucked up.
Well, a show, eh?
Yeah.
I'd love it to be a show, but it isn't yet.
Well, I meant as this is a show not to be fucked up, as in the show we're making right now.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
You saved it. Good job.
Yeah.
But tonight, we are going to talk about perhaps one of the greatest works in the history of American comics.
It may be perhaps the greatest work of graphic storytelling ever in the history of the world.
It is, in the very least, a seminal work. Watchmen, written by Alan Moore and illustrated by David Gibbons.
It is originally, I think, how many issues? 12
12 issues in the mid to late 80s.
Yeah, it was a 12-issue series of actual comic books printed in the 80s by DC. And now you can buy those individual comics if you want. You can find them someplace. I mean, Dragon's Den has them all for like, I don't know how much, but or you can be smart and buy one book that has all of them in it for like $20.
Now, one, we are not going to spoil anything in this show.
Because that is a crime worthy of death.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's his sled or it's actually a man.
Well, funny that you say it's his sled, because Watchmen is basically the Citizen Kane of comics.
Yes, and we're not kidding here. If you have not read Watchmen, I don't care if you love comic books, hate comic books, whatever. I mean, remember, I almost entirely dislike the entire genre of comic books involving underwear perverts.
Yeah.
Superheroes. I don't like the idea of superheroes. I think the way they're done is often lame. I consider Watchmen to be one of the best comic books ever.
Yeah. If you are the kind of person who just only reads manga and you hate American comics, if you're the kind of person who hates comics and think they're for kids and you don't want to read comics at all, everyone who knows how to read, and if Watchmen is printed in your language, you should read it.
Yes, Watchmen is not just a comic book. Watchmen is literature. Watchmen is better than a lot of novels I have read.
It's probably, if on a list of all-time books ever, it's probably near the top.
Actually, it is the only graphic novel to appear on Time Magazine's 2005 list of the 100 best English-language novels from 1923 to 2005.
It's really that good.
So what is The Watchmen?
The Watchmen is a story. Let's see, how can I put this? It's about superheroes, but only one of them is actually super.
Yes.
And they're sort of retired.
It's more, imagine a world very much like our modern world, only while the Cold War is still going on. So
it's an 80s world. The Cold War is going on. Superheroes used to exist, but they don't really anymore.
But here's the thing. Imagine if there were superheroes, or as they call them, costume heroes or masks in this. Imagine if in the real world there were superheroes, but they were actually just normal people who, for whatever reason, were very highly skilled or very well equipped or whatever.
Yep. So pretty much every superhero was like Batman, just a guy with some gadgets.
Yes, and not some of the lame Batman, but we're talking about the dark, gritty, realistic Batman.
The good Batman.
Imagine a superhero story that is 100% believable and as realistic as something like that could ever be. And with one exception, it's pretty much straight up realistic.
Yep.
And it's set in this slightly alternate history Cold War. only a few things are different. I really don't want to ruin anything, but suffice to say, imagine if, because of these superheroes, so America won the Vietnam War, and the Soviet Union and the United States, the nuclear issue is a little bit more on the forefront, and nuclear war is a little bit closer than it ever got in the real world, and the world's generally a pretty gritty, dismal place to be in.
And you have these people who used to be superheroes, and they're just living normal lives now, some of them. Some of them are doing other things.
Some of them are still superheroes, but now they work for the government.
Yep. And one day, one of these superheroes, a pretty important one, is murdered.
Now, actually, just a man is murdered in New York. And one of his friends, Rorschach, who was a masked hero back in the day, and who is still a masked hero, despite the fact that they have been outlawed as being vigilantes, investigates and discovers that this man who was murdered was actually one of his friend costume heroes, the comedian.
Yep. Now, it sort of gets Cthulhu on you from there. You know how I talked about Call of Cthulhu once on the show? I don't know if you listened to that show, but it's all about a guy who finds like a bas relief, and he starts to investigate, and he finds out things he doesn't want to know, and shit just gets worse and worse and worse, and he wishes he never would have known in the first place.
You found the tip of the iceberg, and you have no idea what lies underneath the sea level.
Too bad it's a giant, horrible iceberg with a monster frozen in it that'll fuck up your brain or whatever.
Yep. Even though, unlike Cthulhu, this isn't a story of supervillains come. There's no supervillains. It's just, it's really hard to describe what it is.
It's really weird because it's like, you think superhero story. All right, so it's a superhero and there's a supervillain committing a crime, and the hero has some flaws, but he fights through them and learns something, and there's a big scene where he beats up the villain, and the villain goes to jail, and the superhero goes home having learned his lesson.
It's not like that at all.
There aren't even really any combat.
Yeah.
There's no fights.
There isn't even really a traditional villain. In fact, for most of the story, you don't even know if anything bad is actually going on.
All you see are these people living their lives, and the only bad thing that's happened, and the only question you've got is, who murdered the comedian and why? And
basically, the story is that Rorschach is kind of a conspiracy nut. And
a right-wing conspiracy nut.
Yes, and he's kind of crazy.
And he's definitely crazy.
Yeah, but at the same time, he's one of the most lucid characters in the entire novel.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to call it The Work from now on.
Okay, The Work.
The Work.
It is definitely, if anything should be called The Work, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, here's an example of how well executed it is. This character, Rorschach, is insane. He is an insane man who believes in crazy conspiracy theories, and he is currently following this conspiracy theory regarding the murder of his former friend, the comedian, and seeing where it will lead him. And despite the fact that he's completely insane, he is the most lucid character in this entire world, and everyone else is just a normal person.
Yeah, I would definitely identify with him second most of all the characters in this book.
I hate to say that I agree with Rorschach, but I, in the end, in most ways, do.
In most ways, yes. Pretty much because he's the only one who goes in a particular direction, but I'm not going to spoil any more than that.
Yes. I think it's safe to say that we're not going to talk any more about the plot of Watchmen, because there is absolutely no way to talk about it without ruining things or without giving it such a superficial treatment that you really wouldn't have any idea of actually how good it is. So I think instead, we're going to talk a lot about why The Watchmen is good.
Yes. Well, first, let's talk about the structure of the comic. Each individual issue, of course, has an awesome cover. The covers are all amazing. Holy shit, I love these covers. I can just keep looking at them. I'm looking at them right now. I'm flipping through the book.
Also, I like how every issue of the 12, and they're all in the trade paperback, obviously, begins with a clock that's slowly ticking down to midnight as the comic progresses. And despite that, now consider that also there has been the Doomsday Clock in the real world for the longest time. And the Doomsday Clock exists in this world too. It's kind of a bunch of experts deciding how close the world is to nuclear holocaust at any given moment. And depending on the situation of the world, they change it. And I believe in the setting of The Watchmen, when Watchmen begins, the clock is set to 5 minutes to midnight, with the tension going on in the world at the time.
Yep. If you look at the top left corner of any of the covers, like here, Chapter 1, at the first cover of the first issue of Watchmen, in the top left, there is a clock. It's set to about 10 to midnight. The cover of issue, let me flip to one here. Cover of Chapter 5 it's set at about 7-8 minutes to midnight. And the final issue, the clock on the cover is set to midnight. And if the cover is actually a picture of a clock that's like 1 second away from midnight.
Now, along with that, I don't know if it's every chapter or every issue, but I think it is. There's always like an abbreviated version of a quote at the beginning, and then the full quotation at the end. And it's usually something that sums up in a very elegant way what happened in that issue.
Yeah, usually the quote will be after the final panel on the final page in the corner. Like here, the first issue, after the final panel, there's a small panel on the right that actually also has a clock in it with a time, and it says, "At midnight, all the agents and superhuman crew go out and round up everyone who knows more than they do. Bob Dylan." It's always a quote from something real in the real world, like Bob Dylan, or an old poem, or an old song, or maybe, I don't know, something in the Bible. I don't really remember them all.
Now, that sort of thing is often kind of cheesy and hackneyed in a lot of works, but in Watchmen, it really is done so well, and I don't want to sound pretentious, even though I think anyone who uses the word pretentious on the internet immediately labels themselves as an idiot.
Yep.
Because that word is so useless now. But the amount of thought that went into choosing these quotations and reading through Watchmen, especially the second time, and looking at these quotations, you really understand more and more layers of what was going on in this work. Another aspect, it's called The Watchmen. The Watchmen, in terms of the story, doesn't really come up. There's no group, The Watchmen. There's no superhero, The Watchman. But there's a lot of subtle elements and symbolism that come together under this name Watchmen. There's a lot of clocks. In fact, one of the superheroes, the one person who is actually a superhero who has powers because of something that happened, was a watchmaker. Clocks are everywhere. Time and time ticking is always a huge factor in this.
Yep, that quote of "Who watches the Watchmen" just keeps coming up all over the place.
Quis custodiet ispos custodes.
Yes.
Who will watch the Watchmen? It's from a juvenile satire, and I note that the rest of that quotation, it basically bolter and constrain her, talking about someone's wife. Mm-hmm. But who will watch the Watchmen? The wife arranges accordingly and begins with them. The person that you're trying to lock up, the person you were fighting against, the person you have a watchman, a guard to keep an eye on, is the first person who will be attacked or will succumb to the thing you were trying to prevent, the thing you were trying to fight. And I really can't say much more about that without ruining elements that are in the story.
Now, there are two other things I want to talk about: the structure of the comic itself that differentiates it from other American comics. At the end of every issue, after that final panel with the quote, there are usually about 6 pages or so of text, sometimes with some pictures, but it's mostly text. And a lot of people, I've noticed, like not most people, but there are plenty of people out there, a scary number of people, who do not read this text. They get to the end of this amazing comic, and there's 6 pages of plain old text, and they don't want to read it because, they're used to looking at a picture with a few words in it, and then another picture with a few words, and they're reading very quickly. And then all of a sudden, you're going to spend just as much time as you spent reading, 26 pages of comics, reading 6 pages of text. A lot of people don't want to do that, and I understand the feeling, but if you don't read it, you're an idiot.
Yes, these things, these addenda at the end of each issue, are basically, if you take the world that Watchmen is set in and pretend that it's real, these are primary documents from that world. One of them will be just a newspaper article that was published about one of these masked heroes back in the day. One of them might be the psychological profile of Rorschach that was done by a psychologist who examined him. One of them is just a bunch of poetry and talking about owls.
Yep. And it is very, very important that if you read this comic, you do not skip over the text at the end of each issue. It is so ludicrously important for you to understand what's going on that you read that perhaps more carefully than you read the comic itself.
Because otherwise, you'll miss a lot of the very deep and very well-executed meaning and symbolism that is present. That, we talked about Utena before, and it was kind of the same thing. Shoujo Kakame Utena, the anime, where you have something that's so complex and well thought out that it's almost cyclical, and themes recur again and again and again, and there are microcosms of the entire story taking place within itself. It's like a recursion.
Yeah, speaking of stories within the story, the final structural thing about this comic that is very different from other comics is that there is a kid. There's an African-American kid who hangs out by the newsstand. And the newsstand has a grumpy old, newsstand selling guy who always complains about the world and how it's all shitty.
Those two are some of my favorite characters, just for the last scene with them near the end of the comic.
Yep. And this African-American kid sits there, and he doesn't care about this old man yapping. He wants to read comic books. And the comic he chooses to read is about pirates.
Now, this is definitely a work of metafiction, because inside of the Watchmen, there is this pirate comic.
Pirate comic that could be a comic all on its own.
It is. If you just pulled it apart and read it, it is a straight-up comic that is in and of itself, independently, very good, very meaningful, and very enjoyable. However, do not read it on its own without reading The Watchmen at the same time.
Also, if you're reading The Watchmen, don't skip over the pirate comic.
Because, without ruining much, the pirate comic is very much a parallel for not just the overall theme of Watchmen, but for multiple characters and multiple different things that are going on in the work. And it acts as a foil, a counterpoint. And you may not realize exactly what it's saying, but there's a point at the end where the pirate comic ends simultaneously with something happening in the comic. And that is the moment where I actually put the Watchmen down and said out loud, wow. Because I knew it was coming. It's like Utena. You see, everything was there. You could have put it all together. And then finally, you figure out what's happening at the moment it happens. And it was too late for you to figure it out. And it's beautiful.
Yeah. The other thing about the pirate comic that I didn't catch until like the second or third reading is that the pirate comic, that as it exists in the world of the Watchmen as a physical object, actually has a place in the plot. Not the contents of the pirate comic, but the physical pirate comic itself. Not the paper the kid is holding onto, but the work of art that is the pirate comic has a place in the plot of the Watchmen that you will not catch unless you pay close attention and read the text at the end of the chapters and read the pirate comic and pay attention to all the words that are there. And then at some point you will notice something happening in the plot of Watchmen that is related to the pirate comic in a direct way. And it's not easy to see, but when you finally realize it, you go, oh, that's, fuck,
Watchmen is one of those rare works. And I say rare because I have very little free time. Scott has very little free time. And yet, despite the fact that I am constantly deluged with all sorts of media, all of which I want to consume and interact with, I will take the time to reconsume certain media over and over again. I've watched Cowboy Bebop 3 or 4 times. I've read The Watchmen twice straight through, and I really want to read it all again right now.
Yeah, I'm already starting to read it right now. I've already read it like 4 times.
I'm thinking of taking it on the train tomorrow if you don't.
I don't know. We'll see how much I can read tonight. I got other stuff to read tonight, but yeah.
But
if you really like Watchmen, there's a version of you can buy the normal trade paperback, which is what we have, for $20, which is good enough. You can also buy Absolute Watchmen, which is a gigantic, beautiful hardcover book. It's like $50 on Amazon. And if you respect the Watchmen because you're not an idiot, it's actually kind of worth it to buy that giant thing. Monstrosity, if you will.
Now, another interesting thing is a lot of comics, particularly the kinds that I dislike, they'll always have like a character doing something in the close focus. You're zoomed in on the superhero with his arm back and the motion lines like he's going to punch someone. And the yellow text at the top says, Superman punched the dude. And then it shows Superman saying, I'm going to punch you. And then it shows
Well, maybe if the comic is from the 70s, they stopped doing a lot of that stuff.
But a lot of comics use thought bubbles, independent of all that, showing characters' thoughts, showing what they're thinking. Watchmen never does that. It is entirely cinematic. You can guess at what characters' motivations are from monologues, from their diaries that you'll read, from their body language, from the things they say, but you never actually see into anyone's head.
You know that thought bubbles in superhero comics went out of style years ago, right?
Good!
They haven't had thought bubbles in a long time. Except in comedic comics.
Because I really, really hate thought bubbles. In fact, I often don't like it when I read a novel and I see inside someone's thoughts.
Yeah. What they do sometimes, though, is they have the narration boxes, which Watchmen does have. Like it says from the something something narration in a square box, and then the comic gets going.
Yeah, and the narration jumps around a lot. You know a lot more than the characters do at any given time.
Well, I think but Rim does make a point in that this doesn't have thought bubbles, but thought bubbles in comics, superhero comics in America, didn't go out of style until years later. Watchmen was way ahead of its time. I mean, if you took this and you gave it to someone, especially the Absolute Edition with the superior printing, so they couldn't guess by the print quality, hey, when was this written? And they read the whole thing and they say, oh, I think this was written in year X. It's pretty hard for people to guess the late 80s, but that's when it was written and that's when it was published.
Now, also, I mean, I use the word cinematic, and part of that was because, you don't hear characters' thoughts. Like, that's the big problem with, in my mind, when they made Death Note into an anime, is that most of Death Note
is a character
thinking to himself, and turning that into a monologue really isn't that great. But if it weren't for the fact that it would be hours and hours and hours long, Watchmen could probably be directly, word for word, scene for scene, turned into a movie, and it would work perfectly.
The thing about Watchmen is one of those things where while you're reading it, it's sort of like you're watching like one of the most amazing movies ever, and after you're done reading it, if you've ingested it fully and you know it, then you can in your mind play the movie Watchmen, one of the greatest movies ever. But that if someone actually tried to make this into a movie on film, there is no way they could possibly capture what is in this book on film. It's unfeasible.
I mean, V for Vendetta did a pretty good job in terms of taking the spirit of that work and translating it to the screen. And I think V for Vendetta was 1,000 times easier to do than Watchmen.
How about 10,000 times?
I don't trust anyone to make a Watchmen movie.
Yeah, people are trying. It's been like one of those rumors on the internet for a long time.
I don't think it could be. It would have to at least be a series.
Yeah. In one time, it may come to pass that there will be a Watchmen movie, but it will be so difficult for that movie to appease anyone who appreciates the comic.
I mean, this would be about as difficult as when they made the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings managed to pull it off by some miracle. It would take a miracle 10 times that power to do the Watchmen.
Well, at least of that power. At least.
That would be a satisfactory job. And you'd pretty much demand an awesome job. Because you have, reading this comic in your mind, this image of everyone who reads this and understands it has in their mind the Watchmen movie that is so amazing. So if you actually tried to watch a real Watchmen movie, if it didn't live up to the movie in your mind, it would probably wouldn't sit well, I imagine, with most people.
So let's talk about the art. The art is gritty, dark, and incredibly thought out, planned, and detailed.
Well, the thing about it's like the art the quality of the art, the drawing and the coloring itself is actually. It's slightly above average for a comic of the 80s, but it's really not so amazing. It's not like an Alex Ross painting of amazing detail or anything like that. What's more important about the art, to me, is not how well it's drawn, but what is drawn. Like, if you look at any frame of Watchmen, right? Like, his two characters talking, right? But there's all this other stuff in the picture, too. There's stuff in the background. There's, the characters are doing things. There's all sorts of little details in every single frame that unless you read it incredibly slowly and look at every single thing in every single frame, you're missing out on more than half of the comic.
Also, there are symbols that you probably won't even recognize on the first read-through. And then you'll read through again, and you'll see them everywhere. And you didn't even realize it. Or one really interesting thing is pretty much any time there is a scene transition that is meaningful, look at where one scene ends and where the next scene begins. The transitions are laid out as though it were a film as opposed to a comic book. Mm-hmm. There's probably a word for that. In fact, I think when Emily took me to a lecture with one of her professors way back in the city, we watched bits from Citizen Kane where they did the same thing. But I don't know what the word is, and I feel kind of dumb here, so I'll just leave it be. But it's like that, where you focus on one thing and the scene changes around that thing and it becomes the next scene. And it's just seamless and beautiful.
Yeah. I think what really gets me is that every time, it's part of the reason why I can read it so many goddamn times, is that every time you read it, like you'll notice in a particular, like in a tiny panel, a normal average panel, look, here is a 9-panel grid on some page. In each one of these panels, there's something in the background. There might be a billboard or a newspaper on the ground or a graffiti on the wall, or some stranger character that's not actually a named character doing something with someone else, or a shadow of someone doing something. And all of it is meaningful in a way that is obvious if you take the time to notice it. It's not like Utena, where it's some symbol like, some character keeps hitting their stopwatch and random numbers are showing up and you don't know what that means.
Yeah,
if you see it and you're not an idiot, it's obvious. Like, oh my God, look at that there. Holy shit.
I do keep comparing it to Utena, but at the same time, as much as I love Utena, I think Watchmen is deeper, and especially the commentary that is in Watchmen. And because anything can have a lot of well-executed symbolism, but not only is the symbolism and the meaning beneath it relevant that's in Watchmen, but it's relevant directly to the world we live in now. And it touches on a lot of very uncomfortable issues, and issues that I don't actually have a strong opinion on because I'm about as conflicted as the characters in the story are.
See, I think it's that the issues that Watchmen brings up are so powerful that it's weird. Usually when some other work of art brings up issues, it's like I start to form an opinion, I see what opinion they have of it, I decide if I agree or disagree. In Watchmen, that doesn't really happen. Like, I just kind of go with it. And it's just waiting. It's like I'm wading through this muck, but the muck is rich with awesome art. And I don't even bother trying to decide if I'm going that way or if I'm going the other way or what I think. I just take it in and let it go because there's really no other way. And I just try to get as much of it as possible because it's just so thick. If I really wanted to get everything out of it, it's like if I read it so slowly that I poured over every single panel to get everything out of it, then it would take me so long that I'd forget like the 2 issues ago and I wouldn't get all of it into my brain. And if I read it too quickly, I wouldn't see everything in every panel. It's, oh God. Oh God.
And I think at that point, without ruining anything, because I don't even want to ruin who all of the characters are, all I can really say is that you should read this work. I don't recommend it.
If you're listening to this show, and anyone you know, even like people who don't care about comics.
I'm talking your parents, your children, your brother.
Anyone who is age appropriate. I don't think little kids should probably be reading.
Nah.
Probably anyone who's like high school or older and who knows the English language or a language in which Watchmen is printed, which I imagine is many. If it's not many, it's a crime. Should read the Watchmen no matter what. It's like required reading for all human beings. Even if you can't even afford the book. If you cannot afford food, but you're going to live, you should read the Watchmen. Let us close with a quote that is from the Watchmen, but Watchmen takes it from elsewhere.
Yes.
It is our favorite quote ever.
I'm not going to read the entire poem, even though it is also one of my favorite poems ever, but it is in Watchmen, so you might hear me say, and Scott say, words from this often. In fact, especially if you're playing with us in any sort of DS game.
Yeah.
This is one of our common phrases, but...
I said there are quotes at the end of every issue. This is the quote that is at the end of chapter 11, the second to last chapter.
And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Despair!
This has been Geeknights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music.
Be sure to visit our website at www.frontrowcrew.com, where you'll find show notes, links, our awesome forum, a link to our Frapper map, and links to all the RSS feeds.
We say feeds plural because Geeknights airs 4 nights a week, covering 4 different brands of geekery. Mondays are science and technology. Tuesdays, we have video games, board games, and RPGs. Wednesdays are anime, manga, comic nights. And Thursdays are the catch-alls for various rants and tomfoolery.
You can send us feedback by email to geeknights@frontrowcrew.com. Or you can send audio feedback via Odeo. Just click the link that says Send Me an Odeo on the right side of our website.
If you like what you hear, you can catch the last 100 episodes in iTunes or in your favorite podcatcher. For the complete archives, visit the website, which has everything.
Geeknights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 2.5 license. This means you can do whatever you want with it as long as you give us credit, don't make money, and share it in kind. Geeknights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.